I deployed to the Middle East in 2017. It was supposed to be a straightforward 9-month tour, but there was a lot more complexity beneath the surface. There were 4 of us with the right occupational specialty for the position needed, but 2 were disqualified due to legal issues. That left just me and another guy I knew fairly well. He was in the middle of a nasty divorce, and it became clear I was the only one who could go without causing any additional complications. Before I left, everything at home seemed normal. My wife, Kate, was acting the same as always. No signs of trouble, no major arguments. We had 2 kids, and I made sure to let her know I'd be in touch as soon as I landed in country. I'd always been good about that. She seemed supportive, at least outwardly. Maybe I missed something in those last few weeks before I left, but at the time, everything felt fine. Or maybe I was just too focused on the mission ahead to notice. When I first arrived, the transition was rough. The heat, the dust, the never-ending sounds of distant gunfire. It was everything I expected but hoped I wouldn't have to endure for too long. The first month was all about getting acclimated, finding my rhythm. I called home whenever I could, though the connection was always spotty. Kate was taking care of the kids on her own, so I didn't want to burden her with my stress. I mostly kept our conversations light, updates on how the kids were doing, asking how she was holding up. Around the 2-month mark, I got word that I'd be relocated to a more hazardous area for 3.5 months. I couldn't tell Kate the full details, so I just mentioned that communication might be more difficult for a while. I'll never forget her reaction. It was flat. No concern, no worry. It was almost like she was relieved that I might not be in touch as often. I brushed it off at the time, convincing myself she was just being strong for me. After all, what else could I do? I was thousands of miles away in the middle of a war zone, and I had to stay focused. The new location was a nightmare. Every day felt like a battle for survival, not just from the enemy, but from the mental toll it took. There were nights when the weight of it all crushed me, missing my kids, worrying about Kate. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of getting home and seeing them again. But during those months, our conversations became even more distant. She'd answer the phone, but it was like she wasn't really there. I'd ask her how she was, and her answers were always short, dismissive. She rarely asked how I was doing, and when she did, it felt obligatory. I thought maybe the stress of handling 2 kids on her own was getting to her, so I didn't push. I wanted to believe she was just tired, that everything would be back to normal when I returned. When the deployment finally ended, I came home exhausted, but relieved. The reunion was emotional. My kids ran into my arms like I'd been gone for years. I was so focused on them that I barely noticed the slight distance in Kate's hug, the forced smile on her face. We took the older 2 to school the next day and spent the rest of the afternoon catching up. At least, that's what I thought we were doing. I was so desperate to feel close to her again that I ignored the subtle coldness in her touch, the way she avoided eye contact. A few weeks later, Kate got pregnant. I was surprised but happy. Another child was something we had talked about, and it felt like maybe this was a new beginning for us. But from the very start, something felt off. Kate was distant, irritable, and physically cold. She kept saying she didn't feel well, complaining about morning sickness, then about complications that made her uncomfortable. She never wanted me near her, even when I tried to comfort her. Every time I reached out, she'd pull away. At first, I thought it was just the stress of the pregnancy, but the distance between us kept growing. I convinced myself it was all in my head, that maybe this was just how things were now that we had kids and more responsibilities. I buried myself in work, in taking care of the 2 older kids, while Kate focused on the baby. But even after our son was born, things didn't improve. If anything, the gap between us widened. She was constantly on edge, always making excuses not to be around me. There were times I'd sit up late at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Was it something I'd done? Was it the deployment? Had I changed too much? The questions kept me up, but I never got any answers. 6 months passed in this uneasy rhythm, and then Kate had to leave town for her best friend's wedding. She was the matron of honor, so she went back to our hometown for a few days to help with the preparations. I stayed behind with the kids, figuring it would be a quiet weekend where I could catch up on some housework. That's when I noticed it. Small, seemingly insignificant at first. She had bought a lot of things from Target, but they were all unopened. 15 or more items scattered around the house. They weren't necessities. They were things we didn't even need. I decided to be practical. Why let them go to waste? I'd return them and use the money for something else. But when I went to check the receipts in the drawer where we kept them, most were missing. It seemed odd, but I didn't think much of it. I called Kate to ask where the receipts were, and she brushed me off, saying they were probably emailed to her. She told me to check her inbox. What I found when I logged into her email wasn't receipts. It was a new message from a dating site. My heart sank. At first, I thought it must be spam. Surely it was a mistake. But then I noticed the subject line. It wasn't just an advertisement, it was a notification for a new message. I couldn't help myself. I clicked on it. What followed was a rabbit hole I wish I'd never gone down. There were over 50 emails from the same dating site, some dating back to the middle of my deployment. They continued right up until the week before she left for the wedding. My hands shook as I scrolled through them. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. The messages weren't just casual flirtations. They were full conversations, plans for meetups, and worse. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the screen. My mind raced. She had been dating other men while I was halfway across the world, risking my life. And then she came back to me, acted like nothing had happened, and got pregnant. I couldn't breathe. The betrayal was overwhelming. I called her immediately. She answered, her voice light and cheerful, completely unaware of the storm brewing on my end. I didn't waste time. "What the hell is this, Kate?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated for a moment. "What are you talking about?" "The emails from the dating site. What the hell is going on?" She sighed like I was inconveniencing her. "I don't have time for this right now, okay? I'm at the wedding rehearsal. We'll talk when I get back." And that was it. She hung up, leaving me sitting there, stunned. I couldn't wrap my head around it. She had been lying to me for months, pretending everything was fine, and now she was treating me like I was the problem. The next few days were a blur. I took care of the kids, trying to act like everything was normal, but inside I was seething. By the time Kate came back from the wedding, I was ready to confront her. When I asked her again, she admitted to the dating site but downplayed it, acting like it was just a phase she went through while I was away. "A phase?" I repeated, incredulous. "You were seeing other men, and you think it was just a phase?" "I don't know what you want me to say," she said, her voice devoid of any real emotion. "It's over. It doesn't matter anymore." But it did matter. It mattered because she had gotten pregnant, knowing full well what she had done. She had lied to me, to our family, and she didn't even seem to care. I wanted to tell everyone, to expose her for what she was, but I couldn't do it. Not with the kids involved. They didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess, to have their world torn apart because of her lies. So I stayed, for now. But every day, I wrestle with this secret. Every day I look at her and wonder how she could betray me so easily. And every day I feel the weight of it all crushing me.